All right, well, welcome everybody to another Lunch and Learn. Today, Hannah James, one of our field technicians and former intern of many field seasons, is going to give a presentation about some of the research that she's been doing. This is research that she was working on largely with Mary in preparation for the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference, which we all give presentations at every year. Unfortunately, that was canceled this year. So, so we're really excited that she's going to be able to give this paper for you all now. So anyway, with that, I'll let Hannah take it away because she knows what she's talking about and I don't. But anyway, if you all just make sure we are recording this all, so just you keep yourselves muted and stuff like that, so we can all hear Hannah, and then we can, if you have questions, chime in. Take it away.
So as Terry said, I'm Hannah, and today I'm going to be playing Malcolm Gladwell a little bit and looking at outliers, or looking at human behavior patterns through vesselization and GIS, or at least that was my goal. Really, the project ended up being a journey through data management instead. As a quick introduction for anybody that's ever been on a program here, or visited our labs, or dug in our dirt, or looked at our Instagram page, ceramics make up a really large percentage of the artifacts here at Montpelier. And while sometimes little individual sherds can tell us a story, in order for us to more accurately understand that story and to understand the number of vessels, the form of the vessels, so if they're a teacup, a plate, a saucer, and the use of these vessels at a site, we utilize a method called vesselization. And just a real quick definition of vesselization is the process of associating ceramic or glass sherds from across a site or multiple sites with one another and determining their form as a whole. And we've got a fun pre-COVID expedition picture that Dean is a part of. He's by the clock there. And you can see we are both labeling ceramic sherds so that they can go through the vesselization process. And then there's also some people doing the vesselization process. So we basically dump a bunch of catalog ceramics out on a table and we kind of just play around with them until pieces start fitting together. And that's one process in vesselization. Just some vesselization terminology that I've already started using and will be using throughout this presentation. A vessel is a sherd that belongs to the same form as a whole. So if a bunch of little sherds come together and make up a teacup, we refer to that teacup as a vessel, as opposed to a vessel set, which are sherds that have the same pattern or decoration but different vessel form. These pieces were likely produced by the same manufacturer and may have been purchased at the same time. So a vessel set would include the sherds that make up the teacup, the saucers, the teapot, a tureen, soup spoons, all of that fun stuff. At Montpelier, individual vessels get labeled a specific vessel number, and then individual vessel sets also get vessel numbers as well. So that can sometimes get a little confusing. We just always have to make sure that we're dealing with the right vessel number. Two other terms that we use often when talking about vessels are mens and friends. Mens is pretty self-explanatory. They are sherds that mend together. I've got an example here. It's 3 sherds that have come together to mend, as opposed to friends are ceramics that are determined to be from the same vessel because they have the same pattern, the same form, and the same size. I've got 2 sherds here that are very similar. They've got a very similar paste, similar throw marks. They're the same thickness, same type of coarse earthenware. So it is very likely that they are friends. So getting into the actual project itself, my goal was to, when looking at GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems, vesselization can be used to investigate how people's behavior and interaction with the landscape affects how these vessel sherds are deposited. So basically, where are people depositing these ceramics on the landscape, and what can that tell us about people's movement across the property? So, is someone using the same vessel in more than one place on the landscape? So, is an enslaved woman using a utilitarian vessel somewhere in the south yard and bringing it to the north kitchen, and maybe it breaks, and one piece is left in the north kitchen and the other piece is left in the south yard? Are people discarding pieces of vessels in different places on purpose? So, did a enslaved child break something that they weren't supposed to, and then they decided to hide different places across the landscape? Are there some fills from one part of the landscape being arbitrarily placed onto other parts of the landscape? An example of something like this could be when the DuPonts were doing renovations on the main house. When they were, adding different wings and moving dirt around, they could have moved one deposit of dirt from one place and it ended up somewhere else, making the ceramics of one vessel kind of spread apart. And then are some sherds just incorrectly identified as belonging to a vessel? So was there a human error in the vesselization process? And we can always kind of look at all of these ideas and speculate, but there is no way to know for sure exactly, what someone's movements were, because, we don't always have that written down. So the data that I was working with for this project initially was actually left behind by a previous employee here at Montpelier, DJ Barry, who wore many hats while he was here at Montpelier, his last position being GIS technician. So one of the many data sets he left behind for us to play with were of all of these different vessels and vessel sets. So he had pulled all of the cataloged ceramics from OR249, which is like the main house grounds, and pulled them into GIS. We can see the results of some of those in the pictures here. In the left-hand picture, it is just all of the points of all the individual sherds that have been identified as a part of a vessel. And we see lots of little points, and these are hundreds, and some points are stacked up on top of each other. So where you see one point, that could actually be 10, 20, 30 points. That data is really hard to work with because it's all packaged into one layer, so I can't individually manipulate the data for each individual vessel. The picture on the right shows kind of just the linkings of all of those different points linking to their different ceramics and vessels across site. So we can kind of see little groupings and attachments throughout the property, kind of seeing human patterns of movement, but we can't really parse it out because it's just a lot of lines. So I keep using the word outliers, so I'm going to give it a definition. For this project, the term outliers is applied to vessels with spatial outlier sherds, so i.e. sherds that are not contained within the same yard space as other sherds of the same vessel. So what I basically had to do in GIS was, I'll go back to this picture, we see all of these little points are all grouped together, and that's all in one big layer and one big data set. So what I had to do is I ran kind of this query that made all of these little points individual layers based off of the vessel. So instead of all of the vessels being in one giant Excel sheet, it made a bunch of little Excel sheets so I could manipulate each individual vessel set. So then once I had all of those different little layers, I had to go through each layer and determine if it contained sherds that would be considered a spatial outlier. If yes to containing a spatial outlier, the vessel is placed into a grouping titled with that spatial relationship of the outliers. So for example, if the outlier was in the south yard and the rest of the pieces, the rest of the sherds are in the north kitchen, it would go into the south yard north kitchen grouping. So we can see this is kind of an example of what I was going through this whole time. So I would pull up a layer, look at it, and visually confirm or deny that there were outliers present or no outliers present. On the left-hand side, we see vessel number 1237. It's got a grouping of ceramics in the south yard, but then it also has a grouping of ceramics in the north kitchen. So for that, I would positively identify it as a outlier present, and then it would get moved to the south yard and north kitchen grouping. For examples like the one on the right, we see a bunch of sherds kind of in the north kitchen, north yard mitting context. Those would not be identified as outliers for the purpose of this project. If anybody has any questions, feel free to stop me at any point. So the next thing I had to do is I realized that a lot of the data wasn't necessarily clean. So I had to go in and clean all of the data. And honestly, this took up a majority of the time in my project because I found that there were, for each different vessel set, there was different Excel tables and different sheets, and the descriptions of those vessels were different on each of these Excel sheets. So like in one Excel sheet, the decoration of a ceramic might have been Classico Greco-Roman motif. And then another one, it would say the same thing, but it would say woman in columns. And then another one would say transfer printed, neoclassical and floral. So I kind of just looked at all these data sets and tried to come up with the most comprehensive description of each ceramic. So you can kind of see in this top half, I started off with the decoration description as transfer printed, whiteware, neoclassical, and floral. And then by cross-referencing a bunch of different Excel sheets, it ended up turning into whiteware, transfer print, neoclassical, and floral, woman, and columns, just because I didn't want to lose any data that any of these other Excel sheets had. And then I also put everything in all caps, mostly just for clean, so that things look nice and clean. I also added production years to every single vessel set. This gives a general date range for the ceramics. For this, I referenced Leslie Boutery's work with identifying transfer prints patterns using the Transfer Print Collectors Club database and other resources. For non-transfer prints, I referenced the Montpelier's Lab Guide and or Jefferson Patterson Park's Diagnostic Artifacts Maryland Web Guide. Some other data cleaning that I did was I ended up looking up sherd counts for every single inventory number that was listed, every inventory number that was listed. So that took quite a while because I went into the individual database and kind of just had to cross-reference everything. I also added mend numbers. So for ceramics like this one that I showed where it's all mended together, we actually give the mends specific numbers as well. So I added mend numbers to all of these. That way I could figure out which ceramics were actually mending between one another within a vessel. And in this way, I actually caught a couple of ceramics that were supposedly with one vessel, but they actually mended to a different vessel. So I was able to weed out some human error just by looking at mend numbers. I also added site stratum numbers and descriptions. Site stratum basically gives us a general idea of in the soil what was going on at a specific time period. So I added those and I added the descriptions as well. Then I decided to add association strengths to every single sherd. This would allow us to determine if there was human error in the vesselization process. It's important to catch as many human errors as possible before analyzing the data. If incorrect data is assumed correct, then it would lead to a misinterpretation of a site and use of ceramic deposition. So for example, if I thought that there was a ceramic outlier sherd in the north yard and it's had a bunch of friends in the south yard, and I assumed, okay, somebody's moving between the south yard and the north yard with this vessel, but it turned out that it was actually human error and those things don't correlate, then that's incorrect data. So the association strengths that I would assign these sherds are weak, medium, and strong. Sherds with a weak association are just simply sherds within a vessel that have the same pattern. These are weak because certain patterns are way more prominent than others. So ones like standard willow can be found by various different manufacturers and various different vessel forms. So we want to make sure that those are being associated with the correct vessels and not just assuming that they're a vessel because they're the same pattern. Medium association strengths were sherds that are friends within a unique vessel where there are no more than 5 vessels of said pattern. So we've got a couple unique patterns across Montpelier. There's a pattern called Tea Time, and there's a pattern called Gleaners. And these are rare to find at Montpelier, so we can usually be more certain that they are members of a vessel just because there's less of them. And then a strong association are simply sherds that mend together, because there's nothing more sure than something that mends. Finally, it came to analyzing the data, which I'm honestly still in the process of doing as part of my advanced GIS certificate course at the University of Richmond. So basically just looking at each of these different vessel sets and seeing what kind of story they could possibly tell, or even just looking at them and saying, this vessel set has some sherds in it that have strong association strengths and some that have medium association strengths. So I've got 2 examples to show you guys. So this is vessel number 503. There was a total number of 15 sherds that comprised what identified vessel number 503. The sherd that is identified as the spatial outlier is located in the cellar. I'm not sure if you guys can see it on your screens, but if you look inside the dark gray kind of rectangular house shape, there's a tiny yellow dot. Oops. There's a tiny yellow dot, and that is our spatial outlier sherd. This sherd is from the same provenience as another sherd that mends to other sherds in this vessel set, so not the same vessel, but within this vessel set. There are also 2 other identified vessels within the set found on the property. This shows that the association strength of the outlier sherd is likely strong. There are 5 sherds that have a strong association strength within this vessel because they mend together, and they also come from the same provenience, and those are this northernly most yellow point, or green point. But we can kind of start to imagine in this area where there's the majority collection of the points, that's a midden, and then we've got our little outlier sherd there. So was someone leaving the cellar and to deposit something into the midden, and they dropped a piece on the way out? So what kind of story could that possibly tell? And then I've got another vessel number 866, and it's similar to the other one where we've got some of the sherds inside the cellar and some of the sherds outside the cellar towards the north yard midden. Both of the sherds that are inside the cellar have a medium association strength. Within this set, there are other vessels that have the same provenience. Therefore, there is still a possibility of human error in identifying the vessel to which these sherds belong to, but it's still a definite outlier. And just starting to look at all this data and figure out what it could all mean. But yeah. I'm trying to keep up with the comments too. I know Mary asked, how did form play into my ranking? Yes, so I would look at, so if form was identified if form was identified in one of the Excel sheets, it would play into the identification. So making sure that they were all the same vessel form also played into it. There was a lot of cross-referencing of like 1,000 different Excel sheets for every single vessel that I looked at and every single sherd that I was trying to assign an association strength to. It would take, I would say, at least an hour to do every single vessel's association strength, just tracking down lots of data everywhere. And then Chris talked about finding some stuff in the Pine Alley. But yeah, let's see what else. My PowerPoint's, so where am I going from here with all of this? Basically, I am taking an advanced class, an advanced certification class in GIS with the University of Richmond. So I'm working towards creating a full story map that walks through all of the outliers that I'm currently identifying. I've also learned that what we do with GIS is only really as good as the data we put into it, because as I was telling Terry before everybody came on, the data that I started working with, I felt like I was trying to put a square peg into a circle hole, working with somebody else's data that they probably had, their own ideas of how it was going to be used, and then me trying to prescribe my own, ideas on how I want that data to be used. And I ended up just kind of having to start from scratch and cleaning data. Also, this is just a reminder that old collections lead to new interpretations and understandings, and that we always need to look back at the work that we've done in the past, because there's always new information that we can learn from it. But yeah, does anybody have any other questions? I know that this was kind of a wild ride of me talking about data cleaning.
Hannah, I just want to say, number one, thank you for doing all of this work. And I think it is a really important thing. I think so often we talk about the new discoveries being made in the field, but so many new discoveries are sitting in our collections. And, for those of you who don't know, we have over 3 million artifacts in our collections. And that's just a huge amount of knowledge that's just waiting to be discovered in all sorts of different ways. And utilizing these new technologies and these new techniques can really give us so much more information than what we have right now. And I'm so excited to see how much you've done and how far you've taken it and where it's still going to go. But I think it's also such an important lesson of when we are doing any kind of data recording, whether it's in the field or in the lab, you never know how someone's going to use your data. So being as consistent and accurate as possible is so essential. And the vessel databases that you inherited, just as a little background, I think are particularly interesting because they've really been operated very separately from the rest of the databases in that sort of standardization process that we've applied to our artifact databases and our even our provenience databases. And part of that is because, generally speaking, only one person at a time is ever working with them. So they're doing the things, the previous curators and then myself are doing the things that make sense to them. So even coming in, you can actually see sort of the history of who would have been doing this work based on how the entries are done, how they're recorded, what the knowledge was at the time, and then slowly going back to the contents, trying to impose sort of the current standards on past contents. So I think it's a lovely demonstration of sort of the archaeology of archaeology that you've done.
Yep, it definitely, and it was really interesting going through, the different Excel sheets. I could definitely tell, when there was a change in curators or data enterer, just with how things were recorded or with how inventory numbers or catalog letters were assigned, in trying to piece that all together.
Hey, Anna, I have a question.
Yes.
When you added site strata, was there ever any outliers that were explained by through the site strata, like something that was in an 18th century deposit somewhere, but then was in a 20th century deposit somewhere else, or maybe it did show evidence of redeposition, or did that factor into your weak, medium, strong sort of relationships?
So that was something that I actually added, tagged along at the end, was the site stratum stuff. And that was when I was trying to get a bigger picture of the historical, stuff going on at the time that these sherds, stratigraphically were found. There were a couple, I'll have to pull it out and I'll look it up for you, but I think there were a couple that were explained by DuPont construction that were definitely there. But I'm still kind of looking at the site stratum stuff because, to be honest, that was something I only recently added.
Yeah, I think that would be really powerful.
Definitely.
Way to, compare layers across the site. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
That we have some vessels could be a common connector between site strata, which is neat.
But then that's also ties back into kind of what Mary was talking about, the archaeology of archaeology. I found that even, site stratum descriptions are not uniform, across everything, which makes interpretation difficult because, some site stratums are just 18th century deposits and some are very specific, you know, site stratums, which also makes it difficult to always incorporate that data. And then some sherds, because of the time they were excavated, or if they were excavated through shovel test pits, they don't have site stratums. So you know, I'm not able to use site stratums for every single sherd. It's not, you know, a quick and fast answer.
That's cool. Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you.
Hannah, this was a great presentation. I think you really are getting to this. What's interesting about it is that you're really allowing us to have conversations about like the nature of archaeological data, and which I think is very easy to think about. Do you think about data as this thing that inherently exists, right? You just inherently have the data. And what actually is happening, and you're seeing this both because you may have different curators or different research archaeologists or different crew chiefs or whatever, right, is that the information you collect about data has to do with the research questions that you are asking of the project at that time. And it's so easy when you're going through a cataloging process or when we're recording stuff in the field is to simply assume that, oh, this is just a thing that you always record and it's always recorded this way. When in reality, this is a thing that we have chosen as archaeologists to record in this department because it helps us address the questions that we are asking about the past. So the decisions that Mary makes about how certain things get cataloged have to do with what she's interested in knowing.
Yes.
You know, so, and which is different than even what Monticello records, right? We record different pieces of information. We choose to record stuff differently because we have different questions. And that's I think just in looking at like what you needed to do versus what DJ was doing, right? That becomes very clear. You had questions and we didn't have the data, the way it was cataloged wasn't giving you the information that you need. So it really gets to this like heart of how we collect and catalog information, and that it's all really tied to what questions are we asking? What are we trying to understand about the past? And that's really, really important. And I think gets lost very, very quickly when you look at a big data set. So thanks. This is, I think, really, a project really makes that very evident,
Yes,
which is important.
Yep, so this project's really been fun. Like I said in the beginning, it was a journey in data management. You know, I had goals and it ended up more just, I learned about the resource OpenRefine at the very end of my project, which would have probably saved me lots of hours if I would have known how to use it. But it's a learning process.
Hey,
Next time you have to scrub an entire data set, you can use OpenRefine and you'll get it done that much faster.
Yep.
Hey, Hannah, great presentation. And it was love the how you're able to take the data and plot it in so many different ways. The question I have for you, and this is, you know, gets into like managing it for the future. If you had a magic wand when you were processing all the data, you probably had a lot of like you're like, oh my goodness, why can't I have this bit of data, or why isn't everything consistent? If you had a magic wand and you could wave it over the data to make one thing happen, what would that be?
If I could wave a magic wand over all of the data, it would have been just to like, I ran into the problem where so each sherd has an inventory number that's like a unique identifier, and then the catalog letters as the unique identifier, and they're in two separate cells. And if I could wave a wand and just have those two cells be able to cross-reference to those two cells across all other Excel sheets so that they can marry, that would be nice, which I think is what OpenRefine would have given me the ability to do.
That is good to know, because that's one thing that moving forward, when you do data analysis, that's when you figure out what all the problems with the data are, which makes it so much fun to do data analysis, but also so frustrating. It's usually when you go and try to bring it into ArcPro or into other software that you're like, oh my goodness, yeah, something like that. You need to have, you can't just have the inventory number. You can't just have to have the catalog number. You got to have them both together.
Yep,
so.
and they need to be together.
if you could make a list of those, Hannah, while it's fresh in your mind, that would be amazing.
Okay, sounds good.
This would move us forward, not only with our existing data, but, you know, as everybody knows, Mary is coming up with a new system for database management, and to incorporate what you found into that would be absolutely dreamy. Because that's, again, the only way you know how to use the data is by using it. So what you bringing all this stuff into GIS is absolutely amazing, because it's always been the penultimate aim, you know, for any archaeologist to have. You have to be able to map your data, and that's where GIS is just so cool, so dreamy. So
Definitely.
Awesome job, Anne. I love this.
Thank you. Thank you.
That is interesting too, because that's another thing we're doing, right? Is we're trying to bring this data into a new system to analyze it. And we didn't necessarily create all of this data the way it's laid out in Access to work with this system. Chris and I are coming up with exactly the same kinds of issues as we're trying to figure out how to bring site strata in, and realizing the things it can, the way the data we've manufactured it, how it works and how it doesn't work, and trying to figure out what those connectors are so that we can eventually get there to being on a map. So that's the other thing that's really going on. So yeah.
And that was like another thing I realized in my project is, you know, just because you have a new and exciting piece of technology doesn't mean it's going to solve all of your problems right away. You know, you still want to fix the problems that you had with your data in the old technology before you bring it to the new tech. Because as I learned, when you bring it to the new tech before it's clean, you know, you kind of just shot yourself in the foot. You got to spend a lot of hours cleaning data.
And it's another reason why presenting the data at conferences is so important, because in our day job, we don't really have the chance to do analysis like this, because we're moving on to the next site, the next project, and having, you know, it's when we have to give a paper at a conference, or, you know, the MAC conference was canceled, but you still had to produce it, because we didn't know that until like a week and a half out. So you would have been completely stressing out if you waited that long. But having that deadline for a conference is really what makes this kind of data analysis happen. And so thank you for doing that, Hannah. So
yes, of course, thank you. Does anybody else have any other last minute questions or thoughts or concerns?
Was very good.
Thanks, Chris. Awesome. Well, thank you to everyone. I really appreciate you all coming and joining us for this journey.
Thanks for including us, Hannah.
You're welcome, Mom.
I have a lot of questions, but I'll save it for dinner one night.
Okay, sounds good. Awesome. Well, it was good seeing everybody in the eSpace, and stay safe and wear your masks.
yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome.
Thank you, everybody.
Good job, Hannah. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.